Every night at 3 in the morning, your body is not betraying you. It is speaking to you. That quiet walk to the bathroom, half awake and frustrated, is not just about a full bladder. It is a message from your nervous system, your hormones, and your habits, all converging at the most vulnerable hour of sleep. When a person wakes at 3 in the morning to urinate, the common assumption is that the bladder has reached its limit, yet physiology tells a quieter and more complex story. During healthy deep sleep, the brain releases antidiuretic hormone, a chemical messenger that gently instructs the kidneys to conserve water and slow urine production. This is not a random process. It is a carefully timed adaptation that allows humans to remain asleep for long, restorative periods without interruption. When this hormonal signal is strong, the bladder can hold comfortably even if it contains more fluid than it would tolerate during the day. But when sleep is fragmented or the nervous system remains alert, this signal weakens, and the kidneys continue to behave as though it is daytime, producing urine steadily and persistently. The bladder, in this state, becomes the messenger rather than the culprit. Stress plays a subtle but decisive role here. A mind that remains engaged late into the night, whether through screens, unresolved thoughts, or emotional tension, keeps the brain in a state of partial vigilance. In that condition, the body hesitates to fully commit to deep sleep. Antidiuretic hormone release becomes inconsistent, and the balance between rest and wakefulness tilts toward alertness. The result is not simply more urine, but a heightened sensitivity to internal sensations. The bladder may fill only modestly, yet the brain interprets this as urgent because it never fully powered down its monitoring systems. Circadian rhythm also shapes this moment. The body is designed to cycle through stages of sleep, with the deepest phases occurring earlier in the night. If bedtime is irregular or sleep onset is delayed, those deep stages are shortened or missed entirely. Without them, the hormonal environment of the night changes. The kidneys are not given clear instructions to slow down, and the bladder becomes active during hours meant for restoration. This is why the timing and quality of sleep often matter more than the total amount of fluid consumed in the evening. The bed routine before sleep is where this process is either protected or disrupted. The brain looks for patterns to decide whether it is safe to let go. Predictable cues like dim light, reduced noise, slower breathing, and physical stillness tell the hypothalamus that the external world is stable. In response, hormonal signals align with night physiology. Antidiuretic hormone rises, heart rate slows, and blood pressure drops. When these signals are absent or chaotic, the body keeps one foot in wakefulness. Waking to urinate then becomes a symptom of a system that never fully trusted the night enough to rest deeply and continuously. The nervous system does not switch off when the lights go out. It negotiates its way into sleep through signals of safety and predictability. At the center of this transition is the balance between the sympathetic system, which prepares the body for action, and the parasympathetic system, which allows restoration to occur. Many people enter bed with the body still subtly braced, breathing shallowly, muscles holding tension, and attention scattered. In that state, sleep may arrive, but it remains light and easily disturbed. The 10-minute routine before bed is effective not because of its duration, but because it creates a clear boundary between the demands of the day and the permission to rest. Slow, deliberate breathing is one of the most direct ways to influence this shift. When the exhale is gently lengthened, pressure changes in the chest stimulate the vagus nerve, a major pathway of the parasympathetic system. This signal travels upward, informing the brain that immediate threat is absent. Heart rate begins to slow, and blood vessels relax. As blood pressure drops, the kidneys respond by reducing filtration. This is not a conscious decision by the body, it is an automatic cascade that follows the language of calm. In this state, the bladder receives fewer signals to contract, and urgency softens without force or effort. Muscle tone plays a parallel role. Chronic low-level tension, especially in the neck, shoulders, and abdomen, keeps the nervous system in a semi-alert mode. Even when a person lies still, the body may be preparing for action it does not need to take. Gentle muscle release before sleep interrupts this pattern. When muscles soften, sensory receptors within them send feedback to the brain that the environment is stable. This feedback lowers overall arousal, allowing deeper stages of sleep to emerge earlier in the night. With deeper sleep comes more consistent hormonal regulation, including the signals that quiet nighttime urine production. Light exposure and rhythm also shape the nervous system's willingness to descend. Bright or fluctuating light close to bedtime stimulates alertness centers in the brain, delaying the shift toward parasympathetic dominance. Dim, warm lighting acts as a biological cue that activity is ending. When paired with stillness and silence, it helps synchronize internal clocks with the external environment. This synchronization reduces internal confusion, allowing organs to follow their nighttime patterns without interruption. What makes a routine powerful is not its complexity, but its reliability. Repeating the same sequence each night teaches the nervous system what comes next. Over time, the body begins the descent into calm even before the routine is complete. Kidney activity slows earlier, bladder sensitivity decreases, and sleep deepens more naturally. In this way, calm is not merely a feeling but a set of instructions the body understands and follows, shaping the night from the very first moments of rest. Fluid in the human body is not static, it is constantly moving in response to gravity, circulation, and posture. During the day, when a person stands or sits upright for long hours, a portion of fluid naturally pools in the lower limbs. This is a normal effect of gravity acting on blood and interstitial fluid, and it often goes unnoticed. In the evening, when the body finally lies down, this pooled fluid slowly returns to the central circulation. The kidneys then receive an increased volume of blood and respond by producing more urine. This process is not a flaw but a predictable shift in fluid dynamics, and when it occurs too late in the night, it becomes a common reason for waking to urinate. What often surprises people is that drinking less water in the evening does not always solve the problem. Hydration earlier in the day is processed differently than fluid redistributed from the legs at night. The body does not distinguish between water just consumed and water returning from the tissues, it simply responds to changes in blood volume and pressure. When this return happens after sleep has already deepened, the bladder fills at a moment when the brain is more sensitive to internal signals. The result is awakening, not because of excess intake, but because of timing. A short period of leg elevation before bed can change this timing significantly. By raising the legs for several minutes in the evening, the body is encouraged to reabsorb and circulate excess fluid while the person is still awake. The kidneys then process this fluid earlier, allowing urine production to peak before sleep begins. This small adjustment respects the laws of gravity and circulation rather than working against them. It is a quiet collaboration with physiology that often reduces nighttime awakenings without deprivation or discomfort. Temperature and environment also influence how fluid is handled. Warmth promotes gentle vasodilation, allowing blood to move more freely from the extremities back toward the core. This is why a warm shower or a comfortably warm room before bed can subtly assist fluid redistribution. The effect is not dramatic, but cumulative. When warmth, stillness, and horizontal posture are combined intentionally, the body completes much of its fluid adjustment before consciousness fades. Meaning matters as much as mechanics. When hydration is associated with urgency, anxiety, or strict restriction, the nervous system remains alert. In contrast, when evening fluid intake is paired with calm signals, such as slow sipping, warmth, and quiet, the body interprets hydration as safe and manageable. The kidneys respond differently under these conditions, guided by hormonal cues that favor balance rather than elimination. Over time, the body learns these patterns. When fluid is consistently redistributed and processed before sleep, the bladder becomes less active during the night. Waking to urinate then becomes less frequent, not because the body is denied what it needs, but because its needs are met at a time that supports uninterrupted rest. This approach honors both hydration and sleep as cooperative processes rather than competing demands. The pelvic floor is often thought of as a simple muscular gate that opens and closes in response to bladder fullness, but in reality it is a highly sensitive network of muscles and nerves that constantly communicates with the brain. Its primary role is not force, but coordination. When this region senses stability and support, it remains calm and responsive. When it senses threat, tension, or imbalance elsewhere in the body, it becomes vigilant. This vigilance can translate into heightened awareness of bladder filling, even when the volume is not physiologically urgent. Tension rarely exists in isolation. The body functions as an integrated system, and patterns of holding often travel along predictable lines. A clenched jaw, elevated shoulders, or a rigid abdomen can create a chain reaction that reaches the pelvic floor. The nervous system reads these signals collectively. If multiple areas remain tight, the brain interprets the internal environment as one that requires readiness. In that state, sensory input from the bladder is amplified. Normal stretching of the bladder wall may be interpreted as a signal to wake, not because the bladder is overfilled, but because the system is on high alert. Breathing patterns play a central role in this relationship. Shallow chest breathing limits the natural movement of the diaphragm, which normally coordinates with the pelvic floor during inhalation and exhalation. When this rhythm is disrupted, the pelvic floor may remain slightly contracted, even at rest. Gentle, slow breathing before sleep restores this coordination. As the diaphragm descends and rises smoothly, the pelvic floor responds by softening and lengthening. This movement sends reassuring sensory feedback to the brain, reducing the likelihood of unnecessary urgency signals during the night. Stretching and release before bed are effective not because they strengthen the pelvic floor, but because they reduce its need to guard. Simple movements that open the hips, lengthen the lower back, and relax the inner thighs can shift the entire region from vigilance to support. When combined with conscious relaxation, these movements recalibrate how the brain interprets pelvic sensations. The bladder becomes a background process rather than a focal point of attention. Emotional state also influences this area more than many realize. Stress, urgency, and control are often held physically in the pelvis. When the day ends without a moment of release, the body carries these patterns into sleep. Creating a brief ritual of letting go before bed signals that effort is no longer required. The pelvic floor responds by reducing tone, which decreases sensitivity to bladder filling. This is not a conscious relaxation, but a learned response that develops through repetition. As the pelvic floor becomes less reactive, nighttime awakenings often diminish. The bladder may still fill gradually, but its signals remain proportional and quiet. Sleep deepens not through suppression, but through restored trust between the body and the nervous system, allowing rest to unfold without interruption. The bladder does not exist outside of time. It operates within the rhythms set by the internal clock that governs hormones, temperature, alertness, and repair. Around 3 in the morning, the body naturally begins a subtle transition. Cortisol, the hormone associated with wakefulness and energy mobilization, starts its slow ascent in preparation for morning. In a well-slept body, this rise is gentle and largely unnoticed. Consciousness remains anchored in deep sleep, and internal shifts occur quietly in the background. But when sleep is shallow or fragmented earlier in the night, this hormonal change becomes pronounced enough to pull awareness toward the surface. Early night sleep carries disproportionate importance. The deepest stages of sleep, where brain waves slow and restorative processes dominate, occur primarily in the first part of the night. During this window, the brain consolidates memories, tissues repair themselves, and hormonal systems are recalibrated. If this phase is shortened by late bedtimes, irregular schedules, or prolonged stimulation, the body enters the second half of the night without a stable foundation. Cortisol rises into an already light sleep state, and even mild internal signals, such as bladder filling, can trigger awakening. A consistent pre-sleep routine directly influences this process by deepening early night sleep. When the body receives clear, repeated signals that rest is imminent, it moves more efficiently into slow-wave sleep. Heart rate declines sooner, body temperature drops, and neural activity becomes more synchronized. This depth acts as insulation against hormonal fluctuations later in the night. Cortisol can rise as intended, but its effects remain muted, allowing sleep to continue uninterrupted. Light exposure is a critical factor in this timing. Bright light in the evening delays melatonin release, shifting the entire sleep cycle later. When melatonin is suppressed, the onset of deep sleep is delayed, compressing it into a shorter window. This compression leaves the body vulnerable in the early morning hours. Dim light, especially in the final hour before bed, allows melatonin to rise naturally, anchoring the circadian rhythm so that deep sleep arrives on time and completes its work before hormonal transitions begin. Behavioral consistency reinforces this rhythm. Going to bed and waking at similar times each day trains the internal clock to anticipate rest. The brain begins preparing for sleep even before conscious intention, lowering alertness and reducing sensitivity to bodily signals. Over time, this predictability smooths the transition between night and morning physiology. The bladder may still fill, cortisol may still rise, but neither is experienced as an emergency. When the circadian system is respected, waking at 3 in the morning becomes less common. The body moves through its internal changes with quiet efficiency, and sleep remains continuous not because the bladder is silenced, but because the brain is deeply anchored in rest when those signals arise. The moment around 3 in the morning is not random, it sits at a crossroads of the body's internal timing system, where sleep pressure is gradually releasing and preparation for wakefulness quietly begins. At this hour, the circadian rhythm initiates a gentle rise in alerting hormones, most notably cortisol, whose role is not to wake the body abruptly but to ensure a smooth transition toward morning. In a healthy sleep cycle, this hormonal shift occurs beneath awareness, buffered by deep, stable sleep. When sleep earlier in the night has been insufficiently deep, this same shift becomes perceptible, pulling the brain toward consciousness and increasing sensitivity to internal sensations such as bladder fullness. Sleep depth acts as a filter for bodily signals. During deep sleep, the brain reduces the importance of sensory input, allowing physiological processes to continue without interruption. If early night sleep is compromised, this filter weakens. As cortisol rises, even modest signals from the bladder can cross the threshold of awareness. The bladder has not necessarily filled more than usual, rather, the brain has become more receptive to its signals. This distinction is important because it reframes nighttime urination not as a failure of the bladder, but as a reflection of how securely sleep was established earlier in the night. A consistent bedtime routine strengthens this security by deepening sleep during the first sleep cycles. Repeated cues of winding down condition the brain to enter slow-wave sleep more efficiently. This depth stabilizes autonomic function, keeps heart rate low, and supports sustained release of hormones that favor rest. When these conditions are met, the later rise in cortisol remains subtle. The body prepares for morning without demanding attention, and internal sensations remain in the background. Irregular sleep timing disrupts this balance. When bedtimes vary widely, the circadian system struggles to predict when sleep will occur. Hormonal signals become less synchronized, and sleep stages lose their natural order. In this state, the early morning rise in alertness hormones may collide with lighter sleep, increasing the likelihood of waking. The bladder then becomes an easy trigger, even if it is only moderately full. Consistency restores predictability, allowing physiological transitions to unfold smoothly. Psychological reassurance also plays a role. When the body repeatedly experiences nights of uninterrupted sleep, the brain learns that the night is safe and reliable. This learned trust reduces hypervigilance. Over time, the threshold for awakening increases, meaning stronger signals are required to interrupt sleep. The bladder can fill to a greater extent without prompting consciousness, not through suppression, but through confidence in the body's ability to manage itself. In this way, preventing early morning awakenings is less about controlling individual symptoms and more about shaping the conditions in which sleep unfolds. A stable routine, deep early night sleep, and synchronized circadian rhythms allow the body to pass through its hormonal transitions quietly, preserving rest until morning arrives naturally.